Well, let's get more on this. I'm joined by the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Ann Widdecombe. And Ann, in your time, you've seen a number of quote-unquote resignations from government that have actually turned out to be less than voluntary. In your view, did Dominic Raab walk of his own accord, or was he pushed by Rishi Sunak?
Well, if there was a conversation beforehand, then I assume that they came to a mutual agreement. But I'm much more concerned by the wider issue of this, which is that Dominic Raab wasn't convicted of chucking tomatoes and shouting and yelling and swearing. But what he was apparently criticised for is, and I put inverted commas around this, being intimidating. Now, one man's intimidation is another man's irritation. And I worry about two things. First of all, this is what I call, or what Bill Clinton called, the politics of personal destruction. Raab today, somebody else tomorrow. Somebody will be accused of bullying or something else that's inappropriate. And I really do think, first of all, we need to look at that and ask if resignation should always be the answer, because if it isn't, that would actually act as a deterrent to making what I would consider to be frivolous claims. But secondly, you need to address the much wider issue of snowflakery. I mean, the definition of bullying now appears to be that you tell somebody that their work is inadequate. Well, that actually is the function of a boss.
Yes, I'm just being told in my ear we've got some breaking news. Alex Chalk, Member of Parliament for Cheltenham, has been confirmed by Downing Street to be the new Justice Secretary. So I repeat that, that's Alex Chalk, Member of Parliament for Cheltenham, has been in Parliament since 2015. He once served as the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Justice, currently a junior Defence Minister, is now the Justice Secretary. But back to this, Anne, because you raise a very important point about how the civil service will be dealing with ministers and how ministers deal with the civil service. In your view, does this present a real and present challenge to any government determined on reforming the status quo?
Yes, I think it presents a massive challenge. I think it's not just in the civil service now. You know, teachers can be accused of bullying when all they've done is raise their voice in irritation. You know, just ordinary social interaction now. It has all manner of overtones according to woke definitions. And I think it is very serious. It is particularly serious in the political field. And you're quite right to concentrate on the civil service, because the instant you start to interact with ministers, you get a power. And your power is to say that the minister didn't do this or the minister didn't do that, or, you know, I resented the minister's tone or the minister made me feel intimidated. And that, frankly, is the result of dealing at that higher level. I mean, politics is a hothouse of a business. Ministers are under huge pressure the whole time, sometimes at 2 minutes' notice, and not, you know, something blows up and you didn't see it coming. And sometimes they get the wrong information from civil servants. I was given wrong information on 2 quite serious occasions by the civil service. You get that wrong information, and yes, it's an error. It's not deliberate. It's an error. But of course, when that happens, you will sometimes react with anger. And that is not necessarily bullying. I mean, what is bullying? To me, bullying is when you pick on somebody and you continually, over a period of time, undermine that one person. That, to me, is bullying. But bullying because you snap, because you shout even. I've had shouting bosses, both in and outside politics.
Ann Widdecombe, what would be your advice to the new Justice Secretary, to Alex Chalk, in terms of how he should deal with his civil servants? Because, of course, many of those who he will be dealing with as Justice Secretary will be those who submitted complaints against Dominic Raab. How should he handle this?
Well, I think the key to all of this is, and always is, the permanent secretary of the department. And if you're going to criticise civil servants, if you're going to say their work is absolutely useless, if you're going to say, that you're not getting from them what you want, then do it through the permanent secretary. Then you cannot be accused of having taken a tone with anybody because you've done it through the permanent secretary. Now, that was how I used to deal with things that I thought were inadequate. I talked to the permanent secretary. I can safely say with my hand on my heart, I never raised my voice directly to a civil servant, but I did sometimes exhibit extreme irritation with the permanent secretary, not about him, but about what the staff were doing. And that was perfectly reasonable because he and I had an excellent relationship. I had good relationships with all the permanent secretaries and the departments I worked for. That works. That actually works. That's what he should do.
And I suppose this gets to the difference of view that perhaps people have in terms of the role of a minister. Dominic Raab seemed to think that his role was to deal directly with perhaps more junior people rather than go through his permanent secretary, whereas perhaps other ministers leave the permanent secretary to do the micromanaging and set the direction more broadly at a political level. Did Dominic Raab make a mistake there in trying to be too much of a details guy in terms of how things are delivered?
Well, I think possibly. I mean, I used to actually value dealing with the junior civil servants because, it was the rule that the very senior people address the minister. People who actually knew the detail of a bill were the people who were drafting it, people who were working on it day in, day out. They were the juniors. I always insisted they came to the table. But I think that when it comes to complaints, that is when you just need to do it through the permanent secretary and to do it fairly carefully. And I always had a rule about not letting the sun go down on a bad temper. You get these things done and over.
Now, I must say that Downing Street has now released a lovely picture of Alex Chalk, as well as saying that he's been appointed, of course, Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice. And that Lord Chancellor thing is interesting because in the old sort of hierarchy of government positions, technically this is the most senior position in government. Of course, not de facto now, but by the rules of hierarchy in all sorts of state occasions, it's the Justice Secretary, it's the Lord High Chancellor that leads processions, that deals with monarchy. This is a significant post.
Yes, I think it is, particularly ceremonially so. And, of course, he's got the coronation coming up, so I'm sure that he's delighted that he's in this post at that time. It is a wonderful British tradition, and he'll enjoy that. That's something he can enjoy as opposed to all the serious stuff which he's got to tackle.
Yes, I suppose big shame for Dominic Raab that so close to the coronation he will now not be playing that role that the Justice Secretary will. But I suppose that's the way that politics goes. Just finally, Ann Widdecombe, you've seen many people rise and fall in the game of politics in this country. What would be your advice now to Dominic Raab?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't quite know why he'd resigned. I think in his position, I would have been tempted to tough it out and say, look, for goodness sake, I was only insisting on standards. But my advice to him, which he doesn't need, which he knows perfectly well, is not to let it influence his approach, not to let it make him make critical comments from the backbenches. Stay loyal, keep your head down, you'll be back.
Well, I'm just being told that Oliver Dowden is being lined up to become Deputy Prime Minister, another close ally of Rishi Sunak. Dowden worked in the Downing Street in the team of David Cameron before he became a Member of Parliament. Was a very close ally of David Cameron, clearly someone who is politically experienced and knows his way around the Conservative Party. I suppose Rishi Sunak needs that balance. Rishi Sunak only became a Member of Parliament in 2015. He isn't the most experienced Prime Minister we've ever had. Will this reported choice of Oliver Dowden to be his Deputy Prime Minister be that sort of weighty counterbalance that he needs?
I always think that it pays to have eminence grises around you, grey eminences. People who've been around a long time, who've been around the block, who know it all, who've seen it all before. And that is crucial because when things go wrong, people who are new to it tend to panic. People who are old hands say, no, this happened before. And really, it didn't cause the earth to turn on its axis. And so that sort of approach, I think, is vital. So, yes, it's a good choice.
Well, Ann Widdecombe, we'll have to leave it there.
I'm not going to be admiring of anybody who was too closely associated with Cameron, but I think the idea of somebody older and knowing his business is good.
Yes, experience, no matter where it comes from, I suppose, can always be counted on. But for now, Ann Widdecombe, thank you so much for joining us here on GB News Live.